So a few days ago, I broke one of my dining room table chairs. However, I did not take it personal though, because one of the other chairs in the set was already broken. I didn't break it. So anyway, the timing actually wasn't bad because I had just pulled these out of storage a few weeks ago to flip for this episode. Now my original plan was a bit different because I was going to sell them as a set with the table. However, now I'm thinking I actually might keep them and replace my dining room chairs because now I only have 4. And even though I'm not like hosting dinner parties very often, I like having 6 chairs. I like having an option just in case. So what I'll probably do now is actually style these guys to cater a little bit more to my aesthetic. And then I'll list the 4 chairs that are left on Marketplace for free. I was able to pick up these ones for free, so why wouldn't I list mine for free as well? So let's go flip some chairs. All right, guys, welcome back to my little how-to series for upcycling and DIY projects. And like I said at the end of the last episode, we are now officially into the fun stuff. So the first category we're gonna dive into is gonna be furniture. So this category is actually gonna be broken up into 2 separate episodes. Now, this is just due to the high volume of information that I wanted to be able to provide. I just didn't wanna have to squeeze it all into one episode, so it'll be divided into 2. Now, within these 2 episodes about furniture flipping, I did want to have a variety of different projects that I'd be showcasing. So each project is going to have a little bit of a different process. You'll also be utilizing different tools and different materials. And then the last thing I wanted to achieve by having different types of projects is that each project is going to include common issues that you may run into your upcycling journey. All right, so now that we've covered that, let's get into that first project. It's the project that I'm tackling today, as I'm going to show you how to go from this style of chair to this style of chair without having to sand down your furniture to raw wood. How we're going to achieve that is we're going to use a paint base that is either tanned or cream or a very light neutral color. And on top of that, we're going to be using a brown wax to achieve a faux wood grain finish. Now, obviously this technique is not necessary to use on a piece that is a high quality wood that you can sand down raw. This is more for the scenario if you say don't have the space or tools to be able to sand down, because keep in mind with pieces like that have maybe a lot of curves or details or very ornate, and it's very difficult to use a regular sander to be able to actually get it down to the raw wood. And it does take a lot of time if there is a heavy stain or a finish over top of it, or if you're working with a very thin veneer that you don't want to damage by sanding. You know, this can be another option to achieve that wood grain look. So with the majority of the projects that you start, your first step is usually going to be prep work. And that is definitely the case with this project here. So as you can see, this is how I picked up these chairs about a year ago. They were not in the best condition, but I knew they were still salvageable. So I grabbed them and put them in my storage locker. One of the first things I did when I took them into storage was I took the upholstery off of them. I just wanted to make sure the seats were in good enough condition that I could include a section on how to reupholster the cushions. And now that all the seats are removed, the next step is going to be grabbing all of our materials. So first up, we've got a TSP cleaner and then a tack cloth to use with it. And then we've got a couple assorted sanding blocks. I've got one that's a higher grit and then one that's a lower grit. And I also included a paint stripper and a scrubbing brush, just in case you're not able to do any sanding. And the scrubbing brush we'll be using as a tool to create that faux wood grain finish. And then you will also need paint. Preferably if you can find one in a tanned, cream, or in light neutral color. I would suggest buying a paint that's specifically made for furniture or cabinets. This is going to give you the best result. I would also recommend either using a matte or eggshell finish. And here I just have some brown paint. I picked a color that was pretty similar to the original wicker because I do want to keep it as close to its natural color as possible. And then here we've got the star of the show, the brown wax. So this is what we're going to be using to create that faux wood grain. And then once we've allowed that wax to cure, we are going to seal it with a top coat. This one here is a specialty one. It is matte. However, it does provide a durable finish and is recommended for high traffic areas. And then I have another product here that is also a matte top coat. This one here is a polyacrylic. It's what I use for a lot of my projects. However, I do find there's a little bit of a sheen just in comparison to that first product we looked at. And then I've got a couple different styles of brushes here. This first one, as you can see, I've used before to apply wax. So I'll continue using this one. And then I have an assorted pack of just these generic dollar store brushes. Because of their firm bristles, these ones are actually perfect to apply the wax. We just have our little sponge applicator here. If there's anywhere on your project that you have to protect, that you won't be painting, I would definitely recommend taping up that area. And then here I have the fabric for the cushions. I just went to a fabric store, gave them the measurements of the cushions, and they were able to figure out exactly how much material I needed, cut it up for me, and then sent me on my way. And then lastly, we'll need a staple gun just to attach the fabric. All right, so we've got chair number 1 all set up here. It's been sitting in my storage for a while now, so it's accumulated a lot of dust. So we're gonna give them a nice little clean. So that's gonna be with our TSP cleaner. This stuff you typically will leave on for about like 5 minutes, and then you just wipe off with a sponge or cloth. So next, I'm gonna start sanding down these chairs. Because these chairs are quite old, I should be able to remove most of the finish with this 80 grit sand block. And then I'm gonna do the same thing for the rest of the chairs. I am working in batches of 3 here. That way it's just a little bit more manageable. And then I just use the cloth to grab any remaining dust that was left. So for this next part, I am just gonna tape up the edges of the wicker. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to be painting them or leaving them as is. If I do paint them, I'll probably keep them a very similar color. So I'm just gonna tape up the sides, make sure I don't get any paint on it. If you're feeling like the width of the tape is not enough protection, you can definitely tape some paper to the inside part. That way the wicker is completely protected. All right, so now that our surface is all prepped and ready to go, we are finally ready to start applying that paint. So you can throw your paint in either a regular tray, a handheld pail, or even just like a little plastic container. And then we'll start applying that first coat. So I do have a couple tips here. So as I briefly mentioned before in the material section, I would recommend using a brush with firm bristles. Typically when you're painting, you want to use a brush that has soft bristles because you want to try to avoid the brush marks. However, in this case, we actually do want the opposite. Because we're trying to mimic a wood grain, we actually want as much texture as possible. So when you're painting, don't worry about smoothing out your brush lines. As long as you're brushing in the direction of the wood grain or what direction you think the wood grain would be going. Like for example, here on the legs, I'm gonna go vertical. And then for the base of the seat, I'm gonna go horizontally instead. So we are back on day 2. These 3 chairs are all dried. I also painted the other 3 remaining chairs to let them sit overnight. So everything is dried and ready to go. What I will do is lightly sand all the chairs down. And I did want to just show here what one coat is going to look like. So don't be alarmed if the color isn't looking like what you thought it was going to. You'll never achieve full coverage with one coat. So now we're moving on to our second coat. I'm going to give the same suggestions I did for the first coat. Just make sure that you're giving yourself texture with your brush where you can. Depending on the coverage of the paint that you're using, if you're feeling like you're going to need to do a 3rd coat, by all means do a 3rd coat. However, if you're using a high quality paint, you should probably only have to do 2. And if you want to ensure good coverage, maybe just lay this coat on a little bit heavier than the first one, which does actually lead to another tip, which is always go back and check your work. You'll want to check for drip marks, sagging, or even excess buildup in corners. And then once you've checked it all over, you can let it dry. And this should be what it looks like after 2 coats. Okay, so now that we have 2 coats of paint on our chairs, it is time to apply the wax. So for applying the wax, I would recommend using a cheaper brush or a brush that you are not attached to, because once you use it for this wax, you really can't use it for anything else. You'll want to use a brush that has stiff bristles. This is going to give you the most amount of texture when you're applying the wax. So you're going to start by lightly dipping your brush into the wax and then wipe off any excess. And then you're just going to apply it directly to the surface. You're going to want to work fairly quick with this wax though. And then essentially what you're going to do is just going to brush that wax in the same direction that you're going with the paint. On the first coat, I like to spread the wax pretty much as far as it'll go. Again, don't worry about your brush marks. I don't want to use the word aggressive, but yeah, basically the more aggressive you are with your brush marks, the more texture you're going to get out of it. And then once you've spread the wax to your liking, if you want to add even more texture, you can go over top of it with like a cleaning brush like this, as long as again it has very dense bristles. So that first coat of wax is all dry. You definitely want to give it at least like 24 hours to sit because it is a wax. You want this to be fully dry before you're going to put your second coat on. A good way to tell if it's not fully dry is if you go to apply the second coat and it starts pulling off the first one, it's not dry yet. So we're going to give these guys one more coat all over. You can definitely do 3 coats if you really want to achieve like a really rich look. However, this is kind of the style that I'm going for, a little bit more of a washed out look. So we'll only do a 3rd coat on a few different places just to kind of give it a little bit more depth and texture. So yeah, let's get started on that second coat. And so you're going to apply that second coat the same way that you applied the first coat. You'll notice that the color is starting to deepen a lot and you're starting to see a little bit more texture. So now we're on the final step for the chairs. I've let them sit for a few days just to ensure they're fully dry. So this top coat here that I'm using is a matte finish. So typically with sealants, matte is going to offer the least amount of durability, and then you're going to go into satin, semi-gloss, gloss, and that's going to be for like really high traffic areas. You'll want that gloss just for that protection and durability. However, this one is a specialty matte coat, so it's a tough coat matte, and it's also non-yellowing as well. For top coats, it is a preference. You can use a brush, you can use a roller. I like to use a damp sponge. You can also use a paint sprayer as well if you're doing a large piece. They also just have like aerosol sealants as well, but I like to stay away from those for the environment. So for top coats, I usually just use like old takeout containers, and I can reuse these as well. Yeah, so we'll pour some of this out and start applying. So that's the first round of the top coat done. I will probably be doing 2 on this. My chairs aren't like super high traffic, but it is good to just have that extra protection. Just something to note as well, most top coats will either deepen or darken the color a little bit. So just something to keep in mind. Very satisfying. So satisfying as peeling this tape off was, you can start to see the regret in my eyes as I realized that I actually don't like the original wicker color. I was really optimistic that the original color of the wicker, almost that kind of caramel tone, would look really good up against this new paint color, but it did not. It did not provide the contrast that I was really looking for. Which is totally fine, pretty easy fix. So what I did was I took that brown color that I'd shown earlier in the materials. So I took that color and then I mixed a little bit of black in there with it just to darken it up. And then for the application, I diluted the paint. I did 50% paint, 50% water. I was just a little worried the paint might be a little too thick and actually get stuck in those little holes on the wicker. So I figured this way, just go a little bit thinner. And then I also just made sure that I was really brushing it in. I ended up doing 2 coats of this and loved that result way better. All right, so as we wait for the chairs to cure, this is the perfect time to get these cushions done. So I do feel like I need to put a disclaimer here. Textile skills like sewing and upholstery work is not my forte. I do not have very much experience in this. So we're gonna give this a shot. Looked up a couple different tutorials. So I'm just starting off here by laying my fabric out on the table. I'm going to use the cushion to measure exactly how much material I'll need, and then I'll cut it from there. From what I read, it's recommended to leave at least a couple inches overhang. And then I've got my staple gun here. So what I'm doing is I'm just pulling that first side and putting one staple in the middle just to hold the material. And then I'm gonna work on the other side, and again, I made sure to pull over as tightly as I could the material. Put a staple in that. And then I'll start putting more staples in on the sides. And there seems to be a couple different ways to fold your corners. I just chose the most beginner-friendly one. So for the corners, what I did was I pulled the center towards the middle and I put a staple there. And then I folded over one edge and stapled that, which forms a pleat. And then I folded over the other side to form a second pleat. And then just making sure every now and then to flip the cushion back over, just to check it and make sure there are no pulls or any loose material. And then after that was done, I did have a lot of excess fabric, so I just went ahead and cut all that loose fabric. Doesn't look perfect, but you won't see that part of the chair anyway. And then so that is the final result. The fabric that I use is pretty thin. I believe it's just like a faux suede style in the color beige. Just a nice soft fabric, and it's gonna go perfect with the style of the chairs. And now we've come to the end, the final reveal. And just a little reminder that this is where we started. I actually don't mind the orange toned wood. However, with the chairs being in the condition that they were, I knew I was gonna have to do some type of work on it. And this episode felt like the perfect opportunity to give them a little glow up. And so this is the final result here. This was the style that I was going for. I wanted the wood grain to look subtle. If you want a deeper color or maybe just a little bit more texture for your wood grain, if you apply 1 or 2 more coats of that wax, you should be able to get your desired result. But I'm happy with this and the way that the cushions turned out. And now I have 6 dining room chairs as opposed to 4. So all in all, I'd say I'm very happy with the result. So that's going to conclude this tutorial on how to achieve a faux wood grain finish. I hope that you are feeling inspired to try this at home, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.